Hello everyone, I want to take some time in this video to look back at the changes in quarantine guidance over the past school year. This is something that we get a lot of questions about, and the reality is that quarantine guidance from public health official has changed several times since the fall. So before we get started, it's important to understand how public health officials define a close contact. According to Franklin County Public Health, a close contact is anyone who is within 6 feet or less of someone diagnosed with COVID-19 for a total of 15 minutes or more, combined total time, and that starts 2 days before their symptoms began. And that's been the case throughout the pandemic. So as we look back at quarantine guidance, let's start with October of 2020. At that time, according to public health officials, any student who was identified as a close contact needed to quarantine for 14 days from school and any other activity. That changed in December. Updated guidance from Franklin County Public Health reduced the quarantine period from school to 10 days, but kept in place a 14-day quarantine for athletics and extracurricular activities. About a month later in January, the idea of what we now call a modified quarantine was introduced by the Ohio Department of Health. The modified quarantine guidance indicated that students exposed in a classroom setting where certain mitigation protocols were in place could continue to attend classes during their quarantine period. These students would still have to quarantine outside of school for 10 days and from athletics for 14 days. Franklin County Public Health adopted the new standard of a modified quarantine and guidance released on February 12th. Now, just a couple of weeks after that, and a couple of days after our February parent webinar on All In Learning, Franklin County posted additional guidance on modified quarantines. And this guidance clarified that a student is only eligible for modified quarantine if they were 3 to 6 feet from that positive case in a classroom environment. So this meant that any close contacts who were closer than 3 feet from the positive case would need to stay home and quarantine from class and any activities outside of school. And that brings us to the quarantine guidance we are following today. As we returned from spring break, we adopted updated guidance from the Ohio Department of Health and Franklin County Public Health that reduces the time any student who is a close contact of a positive case would need to quarantine from school, athletics, and extracurricular activities. So now any student who is placed in a modified quarantine will be able to continue attending class and organized athletics and extracurricular activities. A student who's placed in regular, non-modified quarantine either will need to quarantine and stay home from school and all other activities for 10 days, or they can reduce that quarantine period and return to all activities, including school, after day 7 if they receive a negative test result. And that test must be taken on day 5 of their quarantine period or later. Students in a modified quarantine will also have this option to reduce the amount of time they would need to limit their activities outside of school. Even if they receive a negative test result, any close contacts should still continue monitoring for symptoms for 14 days after exposure. We also received many questions about why public health officials are making these changes, and that's because public health officials are regularly receiving new information, data, and research about COVID-19 and exposure in schools. We continue to meet with public health officials and our medical advisory team to learn about the most up-to-date information, and we will adopt any updates and guidance from public health. I hope this video has been helpful as we review quarantine guidance over the course of the pandemic. Thanks, and as always, go Bears.